Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 99 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening here in the middle of October, and I'm joined, as I always am, by Scott Coleman. Scott, it's the first time we've done a show for a while where there really isn't anything terribly pressing, and basically, Scott, welcome to the offseason, I suppose.
Hey, Brad, welcome to the offseason indeed. Let's hope for a very busy winter ahead for the Atlanta Braves. But this is going to be a show where we got some stuff to talk about. We're going to, usually we kind of have some structure to our shows and have a very outlined plan. And tonight we have a couple of things that we want to talk about, but we are going to just kind of freewheel it and see how it goes. But I hope you and I hope everybody out there are doing well.
Yes, strongly agree with that. We should say at the top of the show, we are part of the Foul Territory network of podcasts. Please go ahead and subscribe to Hammer Territory anywhere you find your podcasts. We are on Apple and Spotify, places like that. And we're also on YouTube. If you want to watch this podcast, please like the video on that service. Please subscribe to the show. We should also say welcome to the newest show on the Foul Territory network. The Tigers show is now on board. The network grows all the time. I guess bad timing for the Tigers show because they just lost. But hey, heck of a run for the Tigers. Yeah. And people don't know this. I mean, it's actually unplanned with the shirt that I have on right now. I'm a Michigan fan, which is public knowledge. My dad's a Tigers fan, so maybe I should be a Tigers fan. I'm not a Tigers fan, but if I had a second team, it's probably the Tigers. It's kind of like your Diamondbacks. It's like my Tigers. So go Tigers.
Yeah. Hey, it's Tigers, bright future, came out of nowhere this playoffs and really the last month of the season, and they have a very bright future ahead. But always cool. We've said it a few times, but the guys and gals behind the scenes at Foul Territory have been great partners. And I mean, you mentioned it off the top, Brad. This is episode 99 for us as a show. I think we've actually had some bonus episodes that don't necessarily count towards like the total. So I think we're above 100 shows, and you and I and Steven and Sean, it's been a busy last 6 months, but 100 shows under our belt and hopefully many hundreds more to go.
That's right, including 3 last weeks. If you are just catching up now, we had plenty of content last week, both kind of react to the end of the season. I talked on Thursday about the dismissal of 3 coaches and headlined by Kevin Seitzer. So that podcast is still fresh in reaction on Thursday. But anyway, we'll dive in now. I would say the clear lead topic of today's show is a little bit of a rumor. I almost don't even want to use the word rumor. It's kind of a rumor. It's kind of just a solitary report, but it's interesting enough. I will refer to him as my old friend, John Heyman. John and I don't like each other very much. That's okay. Hi, John. He reported that Willy Adames, the Brewers shortstop, quote, has been a target of the Braves in the past, and he included the Braves on a list of, quote, possible landing spots for Willy Adames. Obviously, this is not a new concept. We've discussed Willie Adames before as a trade target. Now he's a free agent, so that's a little bit different. Also, Heyman acknowledged that Milwaukee does want to keep him, as they probably should. He's a very good player, but it seems like most people believe in the space that they probably either can't or won't, however you want to frame that, pay what it might cost to retain Willie Adames, because it's going to be a lot of money. Scott, I'll just stop there. What did you make of this? And we'll dive into who Willie Adames is, like what the appeal is and all of that. But a very big name, and honestly, one of the bigger names on the market overall. Not a famous player, but in a relatively weak free agent market beyond Juan Soto, like he is quite high up there, and there's an attachment here with the Braves.
Yeah, I think with Adames, it is a natural fit for the Braves. It's not breaking any news here that Orlando Arcia really struggled this past season. And as the Braves are currently constructed, there's only a couple of spots on the roster that can be upgraded, like significantly upgraded, because of either contract or players just being so damn good, you couldn't even dream of upgrading it. So for Adames, he makes sense, I think, on the surface. He's maybe not like a superstar, but I think pretty comfortably, Adames has been a top 10 shortstop for maybe this decade. Was looking it up earlier. I believe he is 7th or 8th in WAR among all qualified shortstops since 2021. So a very good player, as you said, maybe not like a superstar or someone who's going to command like the crazy money that Trey Turner and Xander Bogaerts commanded a couple of winters ago. But nonetheless, an interesting name for sure. And regardless of, I guess, what your feelings of John Heyman are. I mean, I think John is pretty famous for just throwing out everything against the wall and seeing what sticks. But anytime the Braves are connected to a high-profile free agent, regardless of the connection, we wanted to talk about it because he is a player who I would sure think the Braves would at least have some phone calls about in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, John, if you're listening, if you want to come on the show, open invite. If you want to come on the podcast, I would place John in the tier below our colleague, if you want to say it that way, Ken Rosenthal, who's on the Foul Territory Network, as well as Jeff Passan. They're kind of in their own tier for me, but Halen gets a lot of news to the point, and I'm joking a little bit about that. But yeah, Adames is really interesting. I mean, you said it, like one of the better shortstops in the league in recent vintage. He just turned 29, so not super young, but not like a super old free agent either. It's kind of a normal age for a guy getting old into free agency. Bizarrely actually has a career-long reverse platoon split. So he's a right-handed hitter, but he actually matches righties, which actually would be kind of useful for the Braves, given what they have or have not done. But this year, he was awesome. He timed his walk year very well. He was top 20 in all of baseball, and that's not just shortstops, all positions in Fangraphs WAR. In fact, he had the same Fangraphs WAR as Marcell Ozuna, who led the Braves. So he would have been either number 1 or number 2 on the Braves this year in that metric. 32 home runs and 21 steals from a shortstop. He walks. He's been an above average hitter that entire time. And the big thing for me is, like, this is a very offense first profile for a shortstop, kind of in throwback fashion. When you and I were younger, there was this group of shortstops that was like these mashers, like the Nomar A-Rod generation, Tejada. That's kind of not been the case as much. There's some guys that kind of do that, Lindor and all these guys. But it's interesting because he's actually had 20 home runs or more in 5 straight full seasons, like non-2020 seasons. He's averaged 28 home runs the last 4 seasons. That's a lot of home runs for a shortstop. And I'll credit this to Steven, our colleague as well, but we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. There is a pretty clear comparison here to a former Brave shortstop, Dansby Swanson, in age, in level of performance, in a different way when they hit free agency, but like they're very similar as far as like overall quality. As their Dansby also had a career year in his walk year, just kind of the same way Adames just did. Not exactly the same. Dansby's more defensively, but he got, as people probably know this listening to this podcast, Dansby got 7 years and $177 million, and that was a couple of years ago. So in theory, it would be even higher than that if you prorate a little bit. I'm not saying that's what he's going to get, but people, including us, probably are dreaming of Willy Adames in a Braves uniform. It's going to cost a lot of money. If the Braves were to go do that, it might be, in fact, it would be their biggest external free agent contract of this entire era. So it would be it's kind of a sea change. But does that strike you as like a logical comparison? Because it does to me about Dansby. Obviously, he left for reasons and all those things, but like it's kind of similar in where they are and what the market might be dictating for those guys.
Yeah, I think as a one-for-one comparison, of course, they're different players, that being Dansby and Willy Adames. But on the whole, they are pretty similar. You mentioned basically the same age when they hit free agency. Both of them had great years going into free agency, which is never going to hurt your case for getting a few extra dollars or maybe an extra year. And I do imagine, so let's, take out the crystal ball. If we had to figure out or guess what Willy Adames is going to get in free agency this winter, I think the 7 years, $177 million that Dansby got from the Cubs is a pretty fair comparison. Dansby defensively is significantly better, and that's one thing I think on Adames that will hold him back from being like one of the upper tier shortstops. If he was a Gold Glove defender, Adames would be getting like the Trey Turner 10 years, $300 million, or Francisco Lindor 10 years, $300 million. But defensively, the numbers are kind of all over the place. And because he is a shortstop, that of course is going to impact him more than maybe a first baseman or a corner outfielder would. But I do agree. I think if you're looking for comps, Adames is kind of a unicorn. There's not a ton of players like him in Major League Baseball right now. But on the whole, I do think Dansby is a fair comp, and something around 7 years at $28 million a year feels like it's probably going to take that if you want to sign him.
So there's more to get to on this, and we're not going to go crazy deep on Willy Adames, but there is more to get to. First, though, a word from our partners at Foul Territory.
We get it. Mornings are nuts. No time for breakfast, but you need to get your day started right.
What if a delicious, nutritious meal could be ready in seconds? Support for Foul Territory is brought to you by Huel, the world's #1 complete nutrition brand. With over 400 million meals sold worldwide, Huel is trusted by millions of people looking to fuel their days with convenient, complete nutrition. Try it for yourself with this exclusive FT offer. 15% off with the code FOUL at Huel.com.
You know we're all about saving time, but we get hangry, like a lot. I recently fell in love with the Huel Ultimate Super Greens Powder, which is a perfect blend of 91 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. I also love their complete nutrition bars, and those hot and savory pouches are fire too.
FT fam, give it a shot. Get 15% off with the code FOUL at HUEL.com. Unlock a healthier, easier way to eat with Huel. Nutritionally complete meals in minutes so you can focus on what really matters.
All right, Scott, to your point about the Dansby projection, it's just one projection, but I think the folks at Spot Track have put out this it's kind of their first endeavor in doing this, but they put out a pretty wide-ranging projection of a bunch of free agents this year, and they projected 6 years at 152 for Adames, which is actually a little bit higher annual value, but one less year. So it's basically that kind of contract, very similar to that range. That seems reasonable to me. $25 million a year or so for a long time, and it's interesting because Dansby's walk year was actually better than Adames has ever been, but that was kind of the only time Dansby's been that good. He timed that even better than Adames did. That was kind of the outlier for him. And there's this whole discussion we don't have to have now about like what age is better between defense and offense. Generally, it's probably going to be offense, especially for a shortstop. Like at some point, unless you're Ozzie Smith or Omar Vizquel, like your defense kind of drops. If you're even Andrelton Simmons wasn't Andrelton Simmons in capital letters after a certain point in his 20s. Like it's just kind of what happens at that position. So maybe you could say Adames might fall back on his offense, and he really is. Like I would say, I mean, I don't want to. This is kind of arbitrary endpoint, but to me, it's like he's a top 5 hitter at shortstop pretty clearly. I mean, you can certainly argue like overall value based on defense, but if you go the last 5-6 seasons, he's been a top 5 hitter at shortstop, like pretty obviously, and that should continue. He's not. I mean, maybe not for 6 years or 7 years, because that's the risk with any of these contracts. Is like when he's 35, he probably won't be worth that contract. You're paying for the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's not exclusive to Willy Adames by any means.
Oh, that's almost all of these guys. Almost every single free agent deal of like a prominent player like this, even the top guys, your Bryce Harpers, Aaron Judge, is like by the end. I mean, I can think of a couple outliers, but mostly every single one of these like 8, 9, 10-year deals end badly, and they know they're going to end bad. That's the thing. Like if you're doing the value calculation, you have to get surplus in the beginning of these contracts, because at the end, no one almost in the history of baseball, I mean, a couple of guys maybe, but at 36, 37 years old is going to be worth $35 million a year. It's just not what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like the Phillies broke the bank to sign Trey Turner, who is a fantastic shortstop on the whole. We know what he does to impact a game. Of course, Trey Turner is worth $30 million today, but is he going to be worth $30 million when he's 38 years old? Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah.
But at the same time, the Braves do have some money to spend. And you just look around the roster right now. Catcher is set. First base is set. Second base, we need Ozzie Albies to have a better 2025, but Ozzie is locked up for another couple years. Third base, obviously set. Center field is set. Assuming Ronald Acuna Jr. recovers, right field is set. So really, there's only the 2 spots on offense, left field and shortstop, that the Braves could upgrade this winter. And clearly, I think Adames is probably the most clear path candidate to significantly upgrading. I mean, even if Orlando Arcia is a better defensive player than Adames is at this point, I mean, these are 2 entirely different players. And, you know, if you're telling me that Adames could be had for 6 years, $150 million, I mean, I would be on board for that. I don't know where you're at, Brad. I think eventually Adames gets more than what that projection of 6 years and 152 was. But, you know, if it's around $25 million a year, as long as the team doesn't go crazy and give them like 8 or 9 years, then obviously you have to be out. I would be interested, and hopefully the Braves are too.
I'm definitely interested as well. And, you know, outside of Juan Soto, who I mentioned earlier, who obviously if the Braves want to sign Juan Soto, sign me up. I think that no one slinked those teams, them to Soto. I think he's probably not going to come to Atlanta. Outside of that, on the position player side, Adames is probably the cleanest fit. There are other guys who are big names, like Pete Alonso's a free agent. Obviously, they're not going to sign Pete Alonso. They have a first baseman already, et cetera, et cetera. Adames is on all these free agent lists, generally a top 5 or 6 position player that's available and at a position of clear need. So, yeah, I think that, just like we said, if they sign him to, let's just use the spot track projection, 6 years, 152, I would be like, sign me up, Willy Adames, great. I would also point out on that reaction podcast that, like, hey, by the end of this, it might not be good. Be patient, but it helps them now. And the Braves are trying to win now. That's not a huge surprise to anyone. They're kind of all in on the present.
Let's say that the Braves are in a World Series window right now. We don't know what this team is going to look like in 6 years. And you can't make every roster move just not caring about the future at all, because obviously that is a component of what Alex Anthopoulos does. But the fact is, we have no idea what this team is going to look like in 2030. We have no idea if they would be World Series contenders, division contenders, whatever it is. We just don't know. And I think every team is obviously operating in a similar way. But I would be in favor of pushing in some chips this winter to really try to pour some more fuel onto this fire. Injuries aside, clearly this is a World Series type of roster. But there are a couple of spots at shortstop, the corner outfield, the rotation has openings, areas this team could be even better. And if they can do it without having to give out some crazy contract, then sign me up.
Yeah, and part of the appeal, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole too much, part of the appeal of having all these guys under contract at reasonable or even better than that prices that the Braves have is that, in theory, that opens you up to be a little bit flexible in spending on some other areas because you're getting bargains. Like, we've talked about the Ozzy Albies contract forever. Part of the appeal of that on the team side to make it so crazy and advantageous is that you're paying your second baseman $7 million when he's worth 20 or whatever you want to say it is. And that $13 million can go somewhere else. That's the argument that we always have about Charlie Morton making $20 million. Like, I understand he's not like a dominant player, but a one-year deal and that kind of thing, you have flexibility because everybody else is signed so cheaply. At the same time, we should acknowledge Alex has never spent like this on a free agent externally. Now, you could say he's paid some guys, he's paid extensions. The Chris Sale deal is kind of weird. Like, he's making a lot of money, but it was kind of prorated for them this year. There's guys that make a lot of money on the team, but even Max Fried, who we talked about a lot, and we'll talk about more, that's a guy you would be re-signing, but he's never come close to paying a free agent deal like what it's going to take to keep Max Fried. So we're in new territory. It doesn't mean he can't do it or won't do it, but we just haven't seen it. And until he does that, or until the Braves kind of pivot their thought process to paying a free agent, especially a guy who's going to be 28, 29, 30 when you start, because, by the way, almost every single free agent when they get there is this age. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the thing about free agents. They have to get to free agency in baseball. And by the time you're there, you're 28, 29, 30.
And the other thing about shortstops that I wanted to bring up, because this is a pretty thin free agent group for shortstops. We're going to talk about one other possibility here in a moment, but just look around Major League Baseball right now. It might be the hardest position to acquire, that being shortstop. There are about a half dozen who make crazy money on $200+ million deals. There's another half dozen who are, your Bobby Witts and your Francisco Lindors. I mean, I guess in Lindor's case, he hits both of those, but the very best players in the game. And then if you have a talented shortstop making no money, it's basically impossible to trade for that player. Call it Bobby Witt before he signed his $12-year deal this past season. So it's not as if there are a dozen shortstops who Alex could look at. It's Adames. It's Ha-Seong Kim, who is also a free agent this winter. And that's kind of it, man. I mean, if you look around, there are a couple of shortstops who, without doing a full deep dive, there are a couple of shortstops who could presumably be traded for. But it is a bit of a seller's market in that regard for agents, where they can kind of command top dollar because they know there's not just a bunch of talented shortstops just waiting around looking for jobs.
Yeah, that's the thing here. And I've already seen some people that I think are smart, not necessarily arguing on behalf of Orlando Arcia. No one's talking about Orlando Arcia being good, but in response to people like us, and we've done this, like, hey, they got to figure this out at shortstop, right? And I get it. But one of the arguments you could make is that if it had been Arcia from 2 years ago, it's great to have, you can have a ninth starter who's just okay, who catches the ball at shortstop, who makes very little money because of what you said. It's really, really hard to acquire shortstops. And that's probably, honestly, Alex wouldn't probably acknowledge this. If we gave him Churchill, would they have liked to get a shortstop last winter in a vacuum? I think the answer is probably yes. But he understands how hard it is. And you could look at RCA from the previous year and say, hey, Orlando, if you do that again, we're good. We're fine. And if he did that again, we wouldn't be as eager to replace him. Would we talk about an upgrade there? Yeah, we did it last winter on our old podcast. We talked about, hey, it'd be great to upgrade on Arcia, but the urgency level wasn't there because he had just come off a reasonable season at the plate. If he has a 70 WRC plus like he did this year, it's kind of hard to argue that. So internal projections on what he actually is might dictate this, but the only reason why it's not like a slam dunk, even if we want it to be, to replace Arcia, it's just like you have to find someone and be able to either pay them in free agency or trade for them. And trade costs are going to be a lot too. So we're not saying they don't do it, but if you're anybody you're trying to trade for is obviously like way better than Arcia is going to cost a lot either in free agency or in trade.
And it really comes down to, do you want to spend or maybe overspend in free agency and in dollars? Or do you want to thin out your farm system in order to try and make a trade for a shortstop? Now there's pros and cons to both. There presumably a couple of young shortstops in the upper levels of the minor leagues that Alex might be interested in looking at. Maybe the Braves could use some of their pitching depth in Gwinnett in order to swing a trade. Again, maybe that's it for another podcast this winter, but I think it's pretty clear that shortstop is maybe the priority on offense. There is a log jam in the outfield, and there's a lot of ways they could go to try to clear some of that log jam up. There's also the $10 million question of Ronald Acuna's knee health, and if he's going to be 100%, 80%, 50%. I mean, we just don't know. And the one other player who we wanted to quickly touch on in free agency is Ha-Seong Kim. Now, he may not be a super familiar name to fans, although Kim's very good. He was with the San Diego Padres the last 4 seasons. One note is that he just underwent shoulder surgery, and he will likely miss maybe the first month of next season. He's also represented by Scott Boras, which is not great. Historically, there has not been much conversation between Boras and Alex Anthopoulos, but it doesn't mean it's an automatic no. But Ha-Seong Kim, very good overall shortstop, and I'd say average-ish hitter, good on-base percentage. He walks a ton. His defense is good. He's a pretty fast base runner as well. And I think, if you tell me that Kim is going to get something like 4 years and maybe $80 million in free agency compared to, say, 7 years and $175 million that Adames might command, I think there is going to be some kind of interest from the Braves in that regard.
Yeah, and it's all about price point. I'm with you. He's obviously worse, but you could argue he's a little bit even more projectable in some ways. The defense maybe better. Offensively, he's not quite the same player, but maybe the shoulder injury recovery dims the market on him enough where it becomes a value. That's definitely possible. There's a little bit of give and take there, but as I will probably argue again, even though you're going to get mad at me, Scott, Orlando Arcia makes $2 million, and if he has to start for you for a month at shortstop, that's okay. It's fine. That's
for a month.
You know what I mean? Sure. Yeah. I'm saying on the Ha-Seong Kim thing, like you can, Arcia gives you more runway than a lot of teams would have, like to sign a guy who is currently injured, because you know that it may not be a great long-term solution, but if you get an injury to somebody, like even as much as we have picked on Orlando in recent months, he's a very overqualified backup infielder making $2 million a year. So like there's some flexibility there. I don't know. I'd be interested. I don't know what the projections even are thinking with Ha-Seong Kim. Like I'm trying to see, even as we're talking right now, what his projection is on Spot. I'm not even sure they did one for him on Spot Track, but maybe it's definitely more reasonable. And obviously reasonable is a different discussion when it comes to what actually is reasonable on shortstops, but it won't cost Willy Adames money.
Yes. Yeah. And he's not as good as Willy Adames either.
No, he's not.
It's all part of the equation. And as we've said, I think we said it at the trade deadline when we were doing that preview. I think on the whole, Alex Anthopoulos has deserved and has garnered a lot of goodwill with the fan base. There's a reason this team has been so good for 7 years now. But as we have also talked about quite a bit, a very, very important offseason. And frankly, he needs to not only make a decision at shortstop, but hit on that decision. It's a very important decision. It's a very important position on the field. Whereas maybe in the corner outfield with all the uncertainty, you can probably piece that together a little bit easier. But I can't do another 162 of Orlando Arcia, Brad. It's just you said it perfectly. He's a very qualified backup infielder, utility guy. Ozzie Albies has missed significant time over the years. He's a great backup second baseman should you need it. He's a great backup shortstop. I assume he could play third base. But if it gets to opening day and the Braves are carrying a $200 and whatever million payroll with a $60 million bullpen, and they're running out Orlando Arcia at shortstop, I think I'm going to be banging my head on the wall just a little bit.
It would not enrage me as much as it would enrage you, but we would be similar. I think I would be a little bit more measured with it because I can at least see the argument. Maybe this is part of my my podcasting gene. I could be like, if you said, all right, Brad, tee it up and make the argument for Orlando Arcia, I could probably do it. Do I want to? Absolutely not, but I could probably do it.
Yeah, get out of here with your reasonableness and level-headedness, and let's go hot takes. No, I mean, okay.
I'm not trying to change your mind. I think your reaction is the one that fan base will have, which is in a lot of ways makes total sense.
Yeah,
I hope we're not spinning it the other direction later on.
Not every move has to be made with 2033 in mind. Sometimes you have to overpay a little bit in order to get you. I mean, do you think the Phillies are thinking about 2033 with Trey Turner after what he's done for them? Do you think the Mets? I mean, dear God, you think the Mets are thinking about what 2033 is going to be like for Francisco Lindor after the season he just had? Again, I'm not saying Willy Adames is Francisco Lindor, but I think the point of sometimes you have to overpay to get talented baseball players, not just at shortstop, but at any place. And you know what? If you got to add another year and that's what sweetens the pot enough, then you do it and you figure it out 7 years from now.
All right, we can pivot away from shortstop. It's probably a good 25 minutes on the Willy Adames, Ha-Seong Kim thing in October. And trust me, that will come up again. I can almost assure everyone the next rumor we get, all that stuff. Quickly before we get out of here, it's not even really huge news, but Kylie McDaniel, former, I think, did he work for the Braves at some point? Anyway, yeah. Kylie reported that this year's qualifying offer in baseball is a shade over $21 million, which is pertinent to the Braves for one reason. By the way, if you didn't know this, qualifying offers can be issued the first 5 days after the World Series. So they don't have to decide this yet. But Max Fried is a very, very, very logical qualifying offer candidate, meaning the team has to offer that price, $21 million. It's a 1-year tender, basically. And that way, if Max were to leave, the Braves would get a comp pick back. On the free agent side, that player is allowed to sign that tender whenever they want to. I think I can speak for you, Scott. If Max wants to sign the qualifying offer, I would do a dance in the street. So yes. He's not going to do that. Just for the record, he's not going to sign the qualifying offer. But hey, there is no downside. This is my entire analysis on this one, Scott. If you have more, feel free. There is no downside whatsoever to offering the qualifying offer to Max Fried. That's all I have.
Yeah, just let me say this, Brad. In real life, not as like a baseball player, but Brad Rowland, I'm going to offer you a 1-year, $21 million guaranteed deal to continue doing this podcast.
Wow.
And can you imagine being at a point in life where it was like an automatic no way? Of course,
it's literally a 0%. I shouldn't say 0. It's a 0.2% chance that he would sign that.
Yeah.
It would have to be like there's an injury that no one knows about. Like literally, because the Braves would offer more, even if the Braves have decided in their head, and I'm not saying they have, to let Max go, which might happen. That might have already happened. We don't know. Even if they already made that decision, if Max came back to them and said, all right, give me 2 years and $50 million total, they would obviously do that. So, and that's more than this. So the qualifying offer is, it's procedural, but one thing I wanted to at least know, I should say this earlier. The Braves are in the tax, at least they have been in the last 2 years, the competitive balance tax, So they only get quote unquote a 4th round comp pick. You get a worse comp pick because that's one of the penalties, quote unquote, for going into the tax. It's a minimal thing, but if he leaves, the Braves will. And look, would it stun you if they didn't offer it? Because it would to me. I don't know why they wouldn't offer the qualifying.
Yeah,
it's just procedurally
Yeah, I mean, it would be silly not to offer it. At worst, you recoup a 4th round pick. You add whatever the signing bonus is for a 4th rounder these days to your pool.
Yep.
Max is not going to take a 1-year qualifying offer. He's going to get a lot of money. And it could be with the Braves, but if it's going to be with the Braves, it's going to be for 6 or 7 years and maybe $180 million instead. So we at least wanted to mention it. It is something that's going to come up in the coming weeks. There's usually a player, maybe 2 each winter, who does say yes to the qualifying offer.
Or it's close. Like there are some guys where it's like a real decision. This is not one of those, but there are many that are like, so for instance, Charlie can't get it because Charlie's already had it. It's been anyway, a player like that, where it's like, is this guy worth 20 million as the actual question? Then it's like, all right, dude, will they or won't they? The Braves don't have anybody this year that's that decision. It's only Max that's eligible, and he's just an obvious yes. So
like a fun hypothetical is AJ Minter, actually, who is a free agent. Say that Minter came off this past season and he was like the best reliever in baseball, and he was going to hit free agency after, pick some gaudy numbers of choice across the board for a relief pitcher. Minter might have been like, well, 20 million, or I can hit free agency. It's a pretty rare occurrence as we outlined, but regardless, we wanted to, like we said, talk about it, bring it up. And at least the Braves will get something if Max leaves,
right.
Although a 4th
very
round
small
comp,
something.
4th round comp pick is sadly not a whole lot, but that's kind of the game you have to play with good players in free agency.
Yeah, the AJ thing is worth exploring. Maybe obviously it's not now coming off of the injury and all that, but if he had been incredible this year, I generally would be against paying that level of. But look, if he wanted to sign, same exact argument. If he wanted to sign a 1-year, $20 million deal, if he had his best possible season, I think Alex would have been like, okay, 1 year.
Yeah.
Alex loves a 1-year deal.
That's right.
We've seen that for years.
We're down the rabbit hole, but then you decline Aaron Bummer. I mean, again, this is a different universe we're in, but it is October 13th. The Braves have not played a baseball game in 10 days. The Braves are not going to play another baseball game for 6 months. And it's fun to think about hypothetically, I guess.
That's right. Speaking of that, we got a few questions about this. We don't have to go crazy on this, Scott, but people were wondering who we're rooting for in the playoffs, because we do talk about, especially you and I know Steven and Sean watch a lot too. We keep watching. I know a lot of Braves fans don't watch the rest of the playoffs once the Braves are out. I don't blame you. I understand. I am watching baseball. I like baseball. As we're recording this podcast, game 1 of the NLCS is either about to happen or has already started on Sunday. But I think I can speak for you. It's probably not the Mets, but do you, is there a team you are rooting for to win the whole shebang at this point? Now that we know who's going to be playing in the ALCS and LCS, do you have a rooting interest? Or if you don't, who are you rooting against the most? What's the order?
I was going to say I'm rooting for one team and one team only. And I would say here on the count of 3, we're going to say the team we're rooting for.
I'm ready.
1, 2, 3, Cleveland.
Guardians. Yeah.
There
same
you go.
Thing.
Good timing.
I think that was pretty. And look, the Braves did beat them in the World Series. So there's a little bit of rivalry with the Guardians / Old Indians. But hey, I think it's very clear to us anyway. It's Cleveland. Okay. How about this though? Can we agree the Mets are number 4 on the list? I don't want the Mets to win the World Series. Ever.
Yes. The Mets. Okay. Here's my ranking, Brad.
Yeah. Give me the list.
Guardians number 1 by a lot, like a lot.
Yeah. Agreed.
2. It's interesting. I don't hate the Dodgers. I know there are Braves fans who just like despise them, and obviously there's been a lot of history. I don't hate the Dodgers. I love Freddie Freeman. I really like Shohei Ohtani. I think the media coverage is a bit overblown at times, but Shohei is such a good player. Mookie Betts, Clayton Kershaw. There's a lot of good dudes on that team. And then the Yankees, it's been a long time for New York. If this was like 1998, forget it. But it's been a long time, and the Braves and Yankees basically have no history in 25 years.
Okay,
now?
so I think this is actually where you and I, the small, at least relatively small age gap we have, is coming into play here. I absolutely hate the Yankees because probably my most formative memories of Braves baseball are losing to the Yankees. Like I was in that range, that range where you're 10, 11, 12, 13, and nothing matters more in the world than your sports teams. If you are a big sports fan.
Yes.
I was 10 when Leyritz hit the homer in 96. Like that's exactly in the square. I still, until the Falcons did what we can't talk about on the podcast because I'm not ready to talk about it. It's been several years. Can't talk about it. Until then, my worst sports memory was the 96 World Series. So I hate the Yankees. And I think people of a certain age that are Braves fans hate the Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
So I still like the Mets more because it's just fresher. It's just always there. I still hate the Mets more, to be fair. And I think my personal hate rankings in baseball, nobody cares. But Mets Phillies like goes back and forth, but they're definitely 1 and 2 in some order. I think I hate the Yankees more than I hate the Marlins or the Nationals, even though they're in the division. Like I think the Yankees are number 3 on my hate list.
Yeah.
So I will have them.
It's
there.
hard to hate the Marlins. That's such a
the Marlins have been good at certain times, and Nats were good at certain times. I mean, but you're right. I think it's definitely Mets Phillies in some order. But we have the same list, you and me. But it was a lot easier for me. Like I think there's a bigger gap. Like I don't hate the Dodgers either, and that would be controversial. Maybe full disclosure, I was born in Los Angeles. I don't really care about. I was born there. I lived there for 2 years. I have no attachment to the Dodgers, but it's definitely Guardians number 1 by a lot. Dodgers in their own tier though for me. I think I hate the Yankees, so it's very. This is the easiest exercise I'll ever do. Basically, we didn't prep this. I just wrote, hey, be ready for your World Series rooting interest. Guardians, big gap. Dodgers, big gap. Yankees, big gap. Mets for me. It was so easy.
And it's funny you brought up, when you're 10 to 13 years old and sports are like your whole life. For me, my Braves memories are more like the early thousands. So like 2000, 2001. Yeah. That, it's hard to remember what you remember as a kid versus like
of
what
course.
you from highlights and stuff. For me, to answer the question, obviously rooting for Cleveland, that would be, talk about David and Goliath. If Cleveland
they had the longest drought too. The people have kind of forgotten this because they lost to the Cubs, and that Cleveland I believe they had the longest active drought in baseball of like the long-standing franchises without winning the World Series. So like that's another little thing.
Yeah, and Stephen Vogt has done a phenomenal job as their manager. So yes, Cleveland, and then Yankees, Dodgers. I will not be rooting for either.
And they're favored to play each other. So this is you're gonna have to decide in the next maybe week and a half before they play.
The ka-ching noise you hear are the TV execs thinking about a Yankees Dodgers series.
That reminds me. Yeah. Go ahead. No, I was gonna say this is interesting. I can't remember which former player it was, but there was this thread today, and we'll sign off. I promise everybody. Actually, how like you would think that small market teams would root for the Guardians because they are a small market team, but in a very financy baseball way, it actually incentivizes like Pittsburgh and Kansas City, et cetera. They actually kind of want it to be Yankees Dodgers because everyone splits the pool of national TV money separately, like the same, like equally. So it's actually better for the small market teams if it's Yankees Dodgers because that will make them more money. How about that?
Interesting. Yeah. Huh.
I never would have thought about that, but I was like, actually, that makes logical sense to me. But you would think, because like I think it was like Nightingale. Somebody, one of the national people was like, everyone's rooting for the Guardians, and it's like, actually, maybe I bet you the Pirates owner that everyone hates is probably like, go Yankees, go Dodgers. I want money.
Yeah, anything for $1, right? That fan base deserves better for the Pirates.
Agreed.
Yeah, so go Cleveland. If the Yankees or the Dodgers win the World Series, I will not be like annoyed or frustrated. If the Mets win the World Series, that would be pretty terrible.
Especially after this season when the Mets and this is, I'll avoid the rabbit hole entirely, but the Mets, to me this year are the embodiment of a team that shouldn't be in the playoffs. Like, I hate the expanded playoffs. If you're a new listener, this is a bit that I go to, but I genuinely believe this. I hate the expanded playoffs. I feel like it waters down the product. And and by the way, the Braves would have fit this bill this year as well. The Braves did not deserve to be in the playoffs, in my opinion, this year. They made it by the end, but they were not a team quality that I would like to see in the playoffs. The Mets weren't either. The Mets shouldn't be in the playoffs, and they wouldn't have been until the expansion a couple of years ago. So if they win the World Series, it's another black mark against baseball expanding the playoffs. Just like last year, your Diamondbacks making the World Series, they didn't win it, but like 84 wins, whatever that was. Like, what are we doing here? Get out of here
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah, I know. This is a anti-expanded playoffs podcast. Has been.
I've lost the battle though. It's never changing. I know it's never changing. I just one day maybe I'll accept it, but not today.
Yeah, once the horse is out of the barn, the TV money starts rolling in, it will never go back in. But
nope.
Alas, let's go Cleveland. That would be a great story. I think if we did like a poll, maybe we'll can you poll people in like YouTube comments? Maybe we'll do a poll or something like that.
Hey, actually, that's a great idea. If you made it to the end of the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're just an audio subscriber, by the way, you should be subscribed on YouTube as well. The best thing you can possibly do is to subscribe on YouTube and your audio platform. But yeah, go ahead. If you made it this far, comment on YouTube and say who you're rooting for and who you're rooting against. Give us your order. Like the one we just gave you, give us your order. It's a pretty easy exercise. I actually wonder what the split will be. I have a feeling that Guardians will be 1 and Mets will be 4, but I don't know how the middle 2 are going to go. People my age maybe might be more anti-Yankees, but I don't know. I'm generally unsure.
Yeah, no, it makes for a good off-season talk. I hope from as a baseball fan, obviously I want the Braves to win every single night, but as a fan of the game on the whole, I hope the ALCS and the NLCS are good baseball and a good World Series. I mean, last year's World Series was kind of a dud. Texas just smoked Arizona. I think all but one of the games was competitive or was not competitive, I should say. So, hopefully good baseball over the next 2 weeks, and then we can shift our focus to an off season where the Braves have quite a bit of questions, and it should be an interesting off season. I think sometimes you go in and like 95% of the roster is set and there's presumably not much money. And it's like, okay, they're probably not going to do a ton. But this does feel like a busy and intriguing off season ahead. And that obviously makes things fun as a fan.
Yeah. And I think that this entire stretch is so interesting because almost nothing happens until the World Series. So it's like you kind of have to, if you're monitoring baseball, they could do some stuff. But in the meantime, it's just, hey, watch the games. As soon as the World Series is over, the floodgates open and baseball transactions and hot stove and all those things. But until then, we'll be watching and rooting against 3 teams and rooting for 1 team. Mm-hmm. How about this? Let's just get Guardians, Dodgers in the World Series. And that way it wouldn't be so bad. Because that would be what I would root for. These first 2 series, go Guardians, go Dodgers, and then go Guardians at the end. All right, Scott. That's enough on a podcast we were planning to do for 25 minutes. That's now been 42 minutes. As always, anything you'd like to share on the way out on this Sunday evening?
Nothing to share. I hope everybody out there is doing well. Happy start to your week. Maybe Sunday night if you tune in right away, which we appreciate you all for. But as always, we have plenty of content coming. We'll have shows this upcoming week. A big thank you to everybody who has checked us out on the YouTube channel, which has really grown over the last couple of weeks. And as always, the audio listeners, the OGs who came over from the Talking Chop days, the Battery Power days, you all are my hero. So hope everybody out there is doing well, and we'll be back soon with another show.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, everybody. We do appreciate it. Please follow Hammer Territory on social media as well. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. We are on Instagram, etc. Follow Scott on Twitter at Scott Coleman 55. Follow me there at BT Rowland. And please subscribe to the podcast and download the show via multiple channels. Ratings and reviews appreciated as well. Like the podcast on YouTube. Comment your World Series rooting interests in order on that's a great way to tell us that you actually listen to the show all the way through. But yeah, stay tuned. We'll have more this week. We'll see you all next time.